Gary Bolton. I'm the Vice President of Global Marketing here at ADTRAN. I'm also, Katie and I are on the board at Fiber Broadband Association. So one of the things I would encourage all of you, if you are not members, to join the Fiber Broadband Association. And that association is focused on proliferation of fiber across America. And so we have mostly service providers are members, but we have all parts of the ecosystem. And so what we do is we have actually people like yourselves that have never been involved in any kind of communications projects that come in, they're able to meet with the whole ecosystem there and be able to find and consult and find people who can help them out and then be able to launch new fiber projects. So we do have a conference, a big conference. It's in Nashville this past year. It'll be in Orlando next year and then back to Nashville. But we would encourage you guys to join, come to regional meetings. We have a big community toolbox that can tell you how to put an RFP out, provide all kinds of information. Again, so a little advertisement on the Fiber Broadband Association. I also co-chair something called the Broadband and Internet Technology Advisory Group. And what this is a pile of engineers. It's led by Dr. Doug Sicker, who was actually at the FCC back in the day, and he runs the engineering school at Carnegie Mellon. But it basically takes engineers from the whole ecosystem, from Disney or Google to Comcast and Verizon and all kinds of different operators to make sure that we look at the internet and no one breaks the internet, and so we are able to do technical papers that then the FCC and NTIA and other agencies in Washington make sure that they don't put rules in place that are going to ruin what we have as far as the internet goes. And then lastly, I serve as the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce here in Huntsville, which is interesting because it was only a few years ago that where we were not a broadband community. In Chattanooga, which Katie's just down the road, we were finding our citizens were moving to Chattanooga because they had gigabit, now 10 gigabit services, and so we finally, our mayor said he didn't know what gigabit was, but we're going to be the next gigabit community, and we put out an RFP. We saw I had 17 different companies come in and bid on that, and it ended up being with the Huntsville Utilities. You probably heard of that. They're leasing out the dark fiber, and Google is in providing the service. And so it was a great way for the utility company to be able to get fiber out for their substations. They're good at putting dark fiber in the ground. They didn't have to worry about the operations. They let Google do that, and Google leases the dark fiber as soon as they have it in the ground. So as soon as it's ready for service, then it's up to Google to go and turn up subscribers. So there's many different models, and so what we've done today is really talk, Katie started off talking about economic development. How many in this room are electric co-ops that do not offer broadband service? All right, great. So, and that's the purpose of this conference, and so I would say you're probably pretty convinced that if you put fiber out for your community that you're going to get economic development jobs. You're going to get, so here in Huntsville, we had over $3 billion of investment just this year in economic development. So it makes a big, big difference. I get calls every day from small rural communities saying, no one's coming to our community to, put in their business and to offer new jobs because we don't have gigabit service. So I think Katie did a really good job of showing all the benefits of once you have broadband capabilities, that jobs will come and things that you can't even imagine. Dr. Cates and Wilson Cates talked about the amazing, one application just being able to provide great medical service. So I think, there's many, many different applications, but certainly when you think about how to serve your community, telemedicine or e-medicine is pretty important. And then having the different operators, the power companies that have been able to offer broadband services, listening to those guys. I always love listening to their stories and what they do to do that. And then lastly, the last panel to talk about what the network looks like. So that really, the goal today is kind of bring you to that process. And with this last panel, is to really think, okay, what are the deployment challenges? What are the things that are going to be those hurdles that you need to worry about? So what I would like you to do is to think about, since you've heard all these different talks, and what things are you worried about that's going to be that impediment for you before you pull the trigger. And so on this panel, we have Rod Ballard, who's a principal at Thornton, and he's going to talk about how to get started. And then we have Allison Dunn, who's the Vice President of Energy Banking at CoBank, and she can talk about all the funding options, so if you're trying to figure out how to finance this network build-up. And then Carol Mattey is the former Deputy Chief of the Wireline Bureau from the FCC, so she's the one who wrote all these rules with the FCC. And so if you have any questions about and concerns about regulatory and what that means and the implications, she is definitely the expert on that. And she was thinking it's just me dodging arrows after some of the comments earlier. And then finally we have Steve Ross, and Steve Ross has been around for this industry for quite a long time, and as an educator as well. And so he is the editor-at-large at Broadband Communities, and he can talk a little bit about the business case, and certainly, his readers certainly have looked at every aspect of building up broadband networks and fiber networks for rural communities. So to get started, I would like to maybe just start, Rod, with you, and just introduce yourself, and we'll just a little bit about who you are and your company and your expertise, and then let's kind of move down the line, and then we'll get into some questions.
Sure, thank you, Gary. So I'm Rod Ballard with Thornton. Our headquarters is in Montgomery, Alabama. I opened our Nashville, Tennessee office 5 years ago. I've been with the firm 24 years, and I've worked in the electric cooperative distribution industry. I did a little bit in telecom cooperatives as well. And I was telling Dr. Cates earlier during the break, I'm the feasibility guy. And so part of what I do is help you get started on the planning, help you plan, meet with your board, talk about what that could look like, and then I get to work with great bankers and financial people as well to try to secure those funds. So I get to be a part of the team, and it's a real fun industry, a great time to be looking at this, and that's a little bit about what we do.
Thanks, and I'm Allison Dunn with CoBank, and thank you very much for having me for this event. So CoBank is a cooperative bank. We have about $128 billion in assets, and to give you some idea of scale or size for that, so we're much smaller, more than 10 times smaller than a Wall Street, Citibank, or JP Morgan, more along the size of a Regions Bank, so like a regional bank. But we're headquartered in Denver, Colorado, with offices around the United States to serve our members, and we do have a very specific charter. CoBank is part of a network of banks and retail lending associations with a specific charter from Congress to provide capital to agribusiness, rural infrastructure, and rural communities across the United States. So that's our background. And our space in this world, in the broadband world, I work with electric distribution cooperatives, as I mentioned, but we also have a communications arm. So we've been lending to initially rural telephone cooperatives and further to wireless companies that were providing services in rural America. We've been doing that since the 1980s. So now, as the move has gone for many electric cooperatives to be branching out into the world of broadband and very uniquely positioned to do so, we rely heavily on that expertise from our communications team, and it transitions very nicely as we watch the evolution of electric cooperatives building out into broadband. So for our deployment of capital in electric cooperatives in broadband, right now we're working with about 30 electric cooperatives who are building out broadband with more in process and approximately $500 million deployed in that arena.
I'm Steve Ross. I'm, as a editor-at-large or large editor, depending on your point of view, of Broadband Communities. I was the founding editor in 2004, and I've been slowly trying to retire, so that's actually working. I want to talk a little bit about the justification. From 2010 to 2016, rural counties lost about 500,000 in population. That is the first time in American history that that's actually happened. Rural areas are not rural because they all lose population at once or anything. It's just that cities grow faster. So, and it's rural by comparison. As it turns out, we've been tracking that population loss in great detail. And because there are about 20 states that restrict municipalities and sometimes co-ops from actually even threatening to create their own network when there isn't a Wall Street business case to create that network, we can actually show causality. And we've done 5 articles, 5 very large studies that have won a bunch of national awards, pretty much proving that causality. The states that have severe restrictions, it's 20 states, have actually have lost population at 4 times the rate of the non-restriction states. And that's interesting because these restriction states actually are faster growing overall. But all the growth is in cities, and the rural areas have hollowed out. They just can't get broadband. How sure are we? At least a quarter of all rural population loss from 2010 to 2016 is due to lack of broadband access. We're very sure of that data. 24 out of 25, 24 chances out of 25 that that's absolutely real. It could be as much as half of all population loss in rural areas nationwide up through 2016. There the odds are about 75%. There are one in 4 that were wrong, 1 to 3 that were wrong. Last year was an unusual year. Finally broke the pattern. The economy has been pumped up. The cities are getting full up. And so rural population actually increased slightly. If you take away a dozen counties that are very close to big cities, MSAs, but are technically rural because they're not considered part of the MSA, the rural counties still lost about 35,000 people. So it's about a third of the loss rate since 2010. And so the relationship still held, but only 2 chances in 3 that it's real. That's actually in the issue that you got today. The other ones are the other studies are referenced in that issue. I find that unbelievably frightening and unbelievably economically stupid. It strands assets in rural areas. A lot of those assets happen to be your assets. And it means that urban areas become more crowded faster. Mind you, it's still, from 2010 to now, it's been about 500,000 lost, which is roughly, it's a little over 1% of the total rural population in the United States. But that's made a big economic difference. And so there really is good justification. We model these things. I've been using conventional statistics. We've started to use artificial intelligence, particularly a program called Random Forest. We're about 10% of the way down the road to actually correct the gross misinformation that's in the National Broadband Map. We could start with counties that we have good ground truth on, and then compare that with the National Broadband Map data, and then the program goes out and looks for all the others. It's not counties, it's actually a census block route. There's about 15 million census block routes. It takes, my big server is a big i7. It takes 3 days for Random Forest to run through that, to do each data run. When I do it at Columbia University, it can be done in about 4 hours. But it's still a very, very long process. Not ready for prime time yet, but gives you some idea of what's going on. And just rest assured there is a lot of research going on in this area.
See, Steve, if you run that on Bruce Purdy's network with his crypto mining, maybe you can get it done faster.
If the AI program would crypto mine, who would you want?
All right, Carol?
Hi, I'm Carol Mattey, and I am indeed the ex-regulator from the FCC, so to the extent you hate what the FCC is doing, do not boo me off the stage. I can tell you a bit about some of the reasons why the FCC made certain decisions, but big picture, I oversaw the FCC's Universal Service Fund for close to a decade. I've been working on the whole program to transform it to supporting broadband, and also the efforts to make that funding competitively available. I left the FCC in early 2017, and since then I mostly am representing smaller rural telcos that are in fact genuinely interested in serving their communities, as well as some non-incumbents that also are working to get broadband to their communities, and also some governmental entities that again are working very hard to get broadband to their communities. And I look forward to talking more.
And so one thing, I know that Steve and Sean and some others said that, you know, concerned about Washington. I run all the regulatory affairs for ADTRAN, and my observation at the FCC is that you guys have a big voice. You know, the FCC and in Washington, they'll listen more to what you have to say than, you know, what an AT&T or Comcast, because, you know, you guys really are genuine and authentic on what you're trying to do. And, you know, same with Congressman Adderall, you know, he is certainly working with everybody in his district to make sure these things happen. So I would encourage you to, you know, to meet with the FCC, to meet with, you know, your congressman or your senator, and Carol certainly can help facilitate that as well, and help you navigate. But to kick things off, why don't we start with Rod? And Rod, how in the heck do you get started? So Brian, maybe you can show this chart here that Rod has.
So while this chart is pulling up, let me say this is meant to be sort of your quick start guide. Okay, so you go buy a television, you unpack it from the box, and there's a piece of paper on top that says, push this button, start here, plug this in. This is the idea. Okay, quick start on your thinking on how to attack this problem. So I don't want to sound overly hokey. I am an accountant, right? So we believe in facts, allegedly, hopefully. But everything before the but's a lie, right? No. So, and I'll change it to and, that counts. You got to figure out your why. You heard every panelist almost from the beginning discuss why they got into broadband and what it meant to their area. You just heard Steve cite some very troubling statistics. Let me tell you what I get to do with your why. When I write the feasibility plan summary, or maybe your grant, or like 2 weeks ago I spent 2 days at USDA with several people who were writing the rules, several people in Congress, including Congressman Natterholt's office as well, and I appreciate him tremendously, and his staff. I get to repeat your why. So if you don't have the why, now I'm just making up things. And remember, I'm an accountant, I need facts. You don't want me making up things. That's creative accounting, and those people usually end up in jail. So what I need is, what is it that it is compelling? What's the compelling story behind this multi-million-dollar network that you're looking at building? It's very helpful when I meet with AREA and Sean and the folks in Mississippi and what you're trying to do there. And I know you have some tremendous political assets in the state now that are going around discussing that concept. You heard Steve Foshi, thank you Steve for the kind comments earlier. He talked about his 4 tenets, and that's when he first called me and said, come up, we're having a community meeting. He brought in stakeholders from healthcare and education and government, and we sat around brainstorming all day, a very organized method of hearing from each of those stakeholders what they needed from the rural community. And it formed the basis of the why, which then gets us to the other parts of the feasibility study later on. So as you can see on this list here on the sides, the first 3 questions begin with why.
Brian, can you scroll that a little bit?
And it's important. This is about a 2-page document, so don't don't fear, I didn't give you like a 60-page checklist with the hundreds of things to do. But if you really can't answer it, and you may not be able to answer it immediately, but after some thought, if you really can't answer it in an efficient, meaningful way, step back. Is this the right course of action? I guarantee you all will be able to answer that question because it doesn't take long, and you live in these communities to know what that why is. But that's where you start, and then you'll hear from several of the panelists as we get into more specifics about financing and some statistics and some regulatory issues as well that you're going to be facing. But start with the why, and then go from there.
Great, thanks, Rod. Yeah, so basically, starting off your feasibility studies, guys like Rod can help you get that going. So once you've been working on your feasibility study and you're trying to line up financing, what are the things, Allison, that you're going to be looking for?
Oh, yeah, thank you. So from a financing perspective, and in this space, in our electric cooperative world, we are not exclusively, but probably primarily 3 lenders in the space. CoBank is one of them, RUS from a government loan perspective, and CFC also is involved in this space. And we probably all look similarly at a lot of the same things. And I would say from CoBank's perspective, we're looking at a combination of execution risk and financial risk. And so as you're rolling out your feasibility study, first of all, have you done a demand study? What are the demographics in your area? What's expected to be a take rate? What's the competition in your area? You have already heard from some very smart people here who know a lot about this stuff, that those are the things that you're going to be looking into, and they know the details of how to do that. And that's another thing for electric cooperatives, is there's a wealth of knowledge out there now, and a lot of shoulders of people like Steve and Bruce and Keith and others who are stepping out into this space and have already been out there, who can give you a lot of insight and direction about who to go to, who to talk to, and experts who can help you work through it. So competition, demand, take rates, those things. Do you have a phased approach plan? That's going to be really important to most lenders, or so that you have check marks that you can watch as you go along and see how you're meeting. When you get to financial risk, what's the capacity of the enterprise, of the electric cooperative and broadband subsidiary, if it's established in that way, or if it's just the electric cooperative, to take on the additional debt, to take on the additional expenses of the build out of the CapEx while you're going through and until the broadband is cash flowing for you. What about contingency plans? What happens if there are cost overruns? What if you're not getting the penetration rates that you were anticipating? So all of those things from these bright minds here who will help you with feasibility will help get through that. And those are the types of things that the lending institutions are looking for.
Thanks, Allison. So Carol, when you start now, you've done the feasibility, you've looked at your financing, and then you're trying to think about legal and regulatory things that you need to worry about. What would be in that camp?
Well, big picture, you need to be thinking about, do you want to be a retail provider or a wholesale provider? Because there are different obligations that go with each, particularly from the FCC perspective. And you also need to be thinking about, are you going to offer voice service in addition to broadband? There are more regulatory obligations that go with being a voice provider. Don't let anybody scare you off. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You just need to be aware that there are more things that come with being a voice provider as opposed to being just a broadband-only provider. And last but not least, if you're thinking about getting funding from the FCC through the Connect America Fund, you need to be aware that there are even more regulatory obligations associated with that. I won't go into all the details, but big picture, there's performance testing and there's location reporting. And so you need to weigh those considerations. If you can make a go of it with state funding, state grants, and not take the FCC money, you'll have less regulatory reporting. So those are among the considerations. But I will say there are a lot of people out there that will help you with all this, so don't let it scare you off.
Hey, before you set the mic down, I want to put you on the spot a little bit. So, so you wrote the rules, you're part of the National Broadband Plan, and you wrote the CAF. So can you provide some insight on 10.1 and 25.3 and kind of, there's a lot of comments, and I think there are valid comments about, want to make sure that the rural community gets all the broadband it deserves and not be cheated by, some of these speed.
Sure. First of all, I would say I think part of the motivation and concern on the part of the commissioners is a fear that we'll spend all of our time focusing on what I call the mid-markets, and the hardest to serve markets will get nothing. And so that's the reasoning why the FCC has started out focusing on the areas, in the first instance, the areas lacking 4.1, now the areas lacking 10.1. It's motivated by a concern that there just isn't enough money in the overall Connect America Fund to get service everywhere, and so it's a desire to at least target the money to the areas that truly have nothing, as opposed to the areas that have some medium level of service. Now, that may change in the future, and we can talk more about, sort of what's on the horizon, but that's sort of the historical reason for why those decisions were made.
So Steve, you've certainly done the business cases, worked with tons of operators, have a huge following of broadband communities of your network. What services, if you look at a business case, should they launch triple play? What's your opinion on what are the considerations here?
Honestly, I think what you should provide is plain, unadorned broadband, and let people do whatever they want with it. There's video right now is empty calories. There's very, very little profit in it. HBO will actually sell an individual a monthly subscription for a little over $10. Some areas as high as $12.50, but very often they're charging ISPs $13, $14 for the same thing. Now HBO is owned by AT&T. Who knows? ESPN, all the sports channels, the prices come down because they got it up too high. There's nothing you can do about it. If you provide linear video like a cable TV company, you may run afoul of must-carry rules. Must-carry charges from the 900 local TV stations ballooned from about $600 million a year in the aggregate 10 years ago to about $7 billion this year, with no end in sight. They're actually talking about $20 billion. So there's just no money in it. Phone, any number of ways you can deliver phone service, either VoIP or switch, or sort of an in-between, which is what Comcast does, just as an example, if people really want an inline. Down the road, you may end up partnering with cellular carriers. What our models suggest is that in rural areas, not in most urban areas, but in some urban areas, totaling maybe a quarter of the population of the United States, around 80 million people, it would be probably better to have providers in the region join together and offer an open access network and just carry other people's stuff. The reason for that is if you don't, you'll end up just leasing dark fiber to cellular carriers that need to put up 5G micro and mini cell sites. And if there's only one carrier in the competition, it's an inefficient use of spectrum, and it leaves you in a difficult negotiating position. You're basically leasing dark fiber and not getting anything else out of it. So you'll be better off building the 5G yourself, at all open access, having it cover everyone's spectrum, and have the national carriers lease it. I've been involved in substantial model runs and studies on that, both at Boston University's Business School and at Harvard. And that looks so good that it's inevitable. But not this year, not next year. It's 5 years, 10 years down the road. But you want to plan your own network to have that in mind. you don't necessarily want to put a lot of fiber across areas where no one lives, even though it's shorter to get from point A to point B. You may want to follow a road or make plans to follow a roadway, something like that. And by the way, not in your area so much, but in urban areas, the amount of bandwidth required by driverless vehicles to talk to one another when they're all driverless vehicles, that's 15, 20 years away, is more than triple what the peak bandwidth is today for video, and it would be in the morning rush hour. You're building, if you go fiber, you're building networks that'll outlive your lifetime. You got to really think about what the economic situation is going to be down the road. By the way, I don't know, is Ravi in the room? I gave Ravi a bunch of thumb drives to hand out that have our financial models on them, and have all of our economic studies on them, so they can have, I think there's about 40 of them, so if there's multiple people from the same company, just take one. But it's all online, and I think we're going to put it on your website as well.
Yeah, so Mark's got thumb drives, if anybody wants to get a copy of those, it'll be right over there. So maybe I can talk to some of the operators, you know, Steve or Bruce or Keith or Jimmy. Do you agree with you know, what Steve's saying about just going with straight bandwidth versus offering voice and video? What are you guys' thoughts on that? Steve, do you have a mic for Steve? Anyway, you talk about it.
I totally agree on the video. I totally agree. There's still a market, there's still some elderly people who want a phone. And I think it's a mistake not to offer that. But I see a day and time, you know, that may change, it may not change, I don't know. But I think clearly, in our case, we've done some seminars on video streaming. Listen, folks are switching to that. When you've got 100 megabytes minimum both ways, no reason not to. And they say, the elderly are coming to me and say how much money they're saving, which is the end of the day, that's what we're all about.
Yeah, just in the past, I guess last quarter, Comcast flipped over where they have more broadband subscribers than cable subscribers. So their net adds on broadband are growing like crazy, but they're dropping off on cable subscribers. Yeah.
I would agree with Steve on what he said there. Is it's almost as an individual too. You have to look at who you are serving, and we decided not to do the video portion just for talking to several that have been in it, looking at how the negotiations, the costs are going to keep rising. That's probably one of the worst unknowns in the feasibility study is how those costs are going to happen over time. So, but I was Steve, as far as the telephone side, especially in rural areas, some places just don't have cell service, so their only communication at home will be through a landline. So that's why we.
You know, one thing about it though is keep in mind that most cell phones today can access the Wi-Fi router, and move out that way. But I don't disagree. My mother died 2 years ago at age 98, was living at home. She insisted on a landline, maybe so telemarketers would call her and she could interact with her. We have landlines in our apartments both in New York and Boston, which we almost never answer because there's no one on the phone except pollsters and telemarketers. Something else too, by the way, is you make money off of security services, for instance. You go out and deal with, you know, every community of any size every region has someone handling the brinks, the ADT, all that stuff. But self-monitoring security is preferred by a lot of customers, preferred by your local police department, and it's very profitable. Static IP address, very easy for you, and it's a bargain, even at $1, $5 a month for your customers, so they can run their own websites. Very, very popular in places like Vermont and New Hampshire, near Boston, where I spend more of my time than anybody else. There's telemedicine services that are going to be coming up. there's an enormous number of specialty services that each one attracts 5% of your customers. But when you put it together, the ARPUs are so, the net profits in ARPUs can be so high because you're value pricing. And by the way, you can also afford to subsidize that for people that really need it and can't afford it, you know, at the price. That you can make money on that sort of thing as well. But that's not like something you necessarily advertise as, here's a list of 20 things that 5% of you will want, one of, you know, that's stuff that comes later after you get the network established.
So Rod, kind of getting back to the getting started part, so what are the, you know, the big couple things that they should really focus on?
One of the first things you need to do is contact your legal team. Yeah, and your accountant, of course, but call legal and make sure that in your jurisdiction you're allowed to provide the broadband service, the retail broadband service, if that's your desire. Steve mentioned 20 jurisdictions, I believe. We talked about Mississippi already. The old law in Tennessee that's now changed. But what you're looking for is, can we provide this service legally in our state, and to what area? So are you bound by your existing electric service territory, for example? Or if you're a municipal, are you bound to your municipal area? These are things that you need to know immediately before you spend a lot of money going forward on other things. Also, if you're an electric cooperative, which a lot of you are, you need to understand what your bylaws say. Do your bylaws allow you to do provide the services that you want to provide? So quick legal diligence save you a lot of time on the back end. The second thing Allison mentioned as a part of what the bank is looking for are sort of reasonable take rates. And I think Keith mentioned a 30% take rate. Others have talked about that take rate in the beginning. So the important thing to remember is you should view your feasibility in terms of ranges. You know, what if you hit 30, or what if you hit 70? What are likely scenarios? Break them down. There's probably about 3 or 4 likely scenarios in there at certain levels that you need to understand the impacts of the cost and the average revenue per unit behind it. And then getting those stakeholders together, once again, like I mentioned, it happened at Tom Bigby Electric Cooperative in Alabama. When there are several stakeholders around who are willing to write letters on your behalf to Congress and to other outside people, that's very powerful. So that third part is, don't forget who your friends are, who can be there to support you in getting potential grant money down the road. And I do agree there's some challenges with the grant money. My take was that I felt like the authors of these rules, they seem to be getting pretty close. They wouldn't tell me how close. You may know more than me. They didn't give me any dates. I had no special knowledge. But I did sit there, and they were very enthusiastic, and they were optimistic about some of the methods that you're going to be using to apply for these grants, and an online portal and some new IT technology there in DC, right? Hopefully. So that made me optimistic, because I generally am an optimistic sort of guy. So you know, you're remembering who your friends are and you're paying attention. Go to USDA.gov/broadband and subscribe to that letter, and that's a good source of information for you to pay attention to if you're interested in that grant process. That's a part of your potential overall funding.
So, Allison, so there's different financing structures that electric co-ops can look at. You know, what would be the typical ones that you would recommend, and what are the implications of those different structures?
Sure, so I think of 3 primary structures, and I'm going to step back for a minute to the grant monies and just say when we're looking at feasibility studies, we are not looking at grant monies. It's a great thing to go after, and if you've got a team that can help you get there, it's great, but grant money is not free money. You just know what you're working with, and that's the whole point of having this group of people that can help you understand and navigate that process and get through it, because no doubt about it, while it's not free money, when it comes your direction and you're able to stand up in front of your membership and talk about the work that you did to get additional funding, free funding, grant monies in to help build out your system faster. Where did I hear built out 4 years versus 10 years by accessing grant monies? That makes a difference to your membership and will make a difference to your economy. So you just have to know how to navigate those things. In terms of financing structures, kind of 3 structures, really only 2 that are feasible, so to speak. And one would be loans made directly to the electric cooperative or entity that's holding all the assets, or if there's a subsidiary, still loan made to the electric cooperative with loan monies funded down to the subsidiary. And that just looks like an electric loan. It looks like a work plan loan. It's got a 30-year tenor. The terms and conditions are the same. It's one of many, many reasons that probably some of these other big companies fight you guys for access to rural areas, even though they're not really willing to build out broadband service to those rural areas. That's just one of many reasons that electric cooperatives are so uniquely positioned to build out in a financial way that those other entities cannot. A second very common structure that we see a lot is for the electric cooperative to have a subsidiary that holds the broadband assets and loan directly to the subsidiary with the support of the parent electric cooperative, a guarantee, secured guarantee, and a lot depends there on who's on your mortgage, what the requirements of that mortgage are, and again, you've got people that can help you work through understanding what you can and can't pledge, either from a collateral perspective from the mortgage or a regulatory perspective. That second structure, where the loan would be at a subsidiary, might be a little bit shorter tenor, maybe 20 years versus 30. That's still something that you can't get in the general communications world. The pricing might be slightly higher, but really only minimally higher than what would be normal pricing for an electric loan. No fees or minimal fees. It's other than those 2 things, very similar to the same terms and conditions you would see on an electric loan in terms of covenants. We look at the, again, enterprise value, the total value of the electric cooperative and the subsidiary. And the third, and this is really highly unusual, would be standalone financing to the subsidiary business or the broadband entity that's a separate entity without support from the parent. That would be, from our perspective, really unusual. And it can be done. It looks like a communications loan. It is a 5 to 7 year facility. The pricing is higher. There are usually fees. There's a lot more paperwork. So while it can be done, and a lot of people often initially think that sounds like a good idea, really part of the benefit of being an electric cooperative is you have the strength of that electric cooperative to support the financing and make that financing really inexpensive for you to build out broadband.
Yeah, could I add something to that as well?
One thing is you got to get your boards out of the idea of, unless we get a big subsidy from Uncle Sam or Uncle whatever state you're in, or a rich uncle, you never know, you can't do it. Think of it this way. In this day and age, in a very standard build, if you get 6 customers per mile, that's customers per mile, not potential customers per mile, 6 customers per mile, you can probably self-finance it. Because basically, your amortization costs and your overhead come to about $40. You're going to make a little bit more than that on gross profit on average, so monthly. So 6 customers per mile. If you get even a 15% grant, a grant covering 15%, or covering the equivalent of 15% cost of a lower interest rate, all right, that automatically gets you down to 5 customers per mile with the same debt coverage ratio. Or alternatively, you might want to improve the debt coverage ratio to get a lower interest rate. Hasn't mattered so much in the last 10 years, actually the last 5 or 6 years, I guess, as the economy's become more normalized. But now interest rates are going up again, so it may matter more. We've gotten out of the habit of worrying too much about that and monetizing, working out how much that actually costs you until you get the positive cash flow, the interest you have to pay. So even a fairly small subsidy can really do well. And that was one of the things that was behind the CAF2 bidding, that people went after a relatively small amount of money per customer compared to the total cost, and they knew exactly what they were doing, most of them. Don't necessarily, you're not going to get the brass ring in this day and age, okay? But if you get this little piece of it, maybe enough to make life much more comfortable for you.
Thanks, Steve. So Carol, I mean, since you've left the FCC, you've been incredibly busy helping communities like everybody who represents those kind of communities out here. What are the things that they're most worried about? Where are you spending most of your time? So if you're an electric co-op and you're thinking of getting this, when they call you up and say, I need some help, what are the things that you're going to be focused on?
Well, there's two buckets. One is what I need to do to go live, and that was what was keeping me busy this week, working with a particular company that, has started a broadband project and needs, I mentioned there are all these regulatory requirements that you have to check the boxes on, and so we were going through the checklist and making sure that they have everything in order to be able to go live. So that's sort of the big picture of regulatory compliance. And then the other area, of course, is sort of when is the next round of CAF funding going to be available, and what do I need to do to get myself positioned to get that when it becomes available?
Does it block you from?
Yeah, and that, I've got, clients, when the FCC adopted the rules for the phase 2 auction, and I will note for the record, the FCC, philosophically, big picture was really supportive of the idea of a competitive process for funding. That was the original vision when we were working on this back in 2010. I think it was fair to say it was sort of a bridge too far at that point in time, and I'm talking about politics. But the FCC has been working to transition more of this funding into a competitive environment. If you had told me in 2011 that the auction for the phase 2 auction wouldn't happen until the summer of 18, I probably would have quit on the spot. As it was, I spent 6 years working on those rules, and I finally gave up. I was like, I don't know if this is ever going to happen. I just got to get out of here. But last year, when the FCC said, finalize the rules for the phase 2 auction, they said, and we're going to have another auction, a year later. Whether that happens remains to be seen. But more importantly, the big opportunity is what happens when the current term ends for the larger companies that got money for the 6-year term. That 6-year term runs through 2020. That's $1.5 billion annually. If the FCC, the FCC said when we originally developed this vision, at the end of the term, we're going to put all of that up for competition. With a 10-year term, we're talking about $15 billion. That's the big opportunity that everybody's really interested in. And on the subject of, what I need to think about, one important thing, and I think I heard this earlier in the session, was when you're starting to build, focus on the denser areas where this money is never going to become available. If you start in the less dense areas and you complete your build, that means those areas aren't going to go in the auction, because the FCC's philosophy is we're not going to give funding to areas where somebody's willing to do it without a subsidy. Kind of makes sense. It gets back to my point earlier that the FCC's concern is there's just not enough money to get this done, and so they want to prioritize the money where there actually is a need for some additional federal subsidy support to help make the business case.
Thanks, Carol. So we're running out of time, but I'd love to have a question or so from the audience. So everything's on the table, from getting started to how to fund it to your business case or all the regulatory and legal hurdles. Do you have any questions? Sean?
Carol, what do you think about the wireless and larger providers petitioning against the latency requirements that are in CAF2?
Well, I think that's really more of a satellite issue, but I think, the FCC, while I was there, we were pretty concerned about the latency, and frankly, that's why, the FCC adopted the testing requirements and, you know, both speed and latency is to make sure that actually customers are getting quality service and the overall, you know, we're not degrading sort of what everybody takes for granted. You know, I don't think they're going to be highly sympathetic to loosening that, but, you know, remains to be seen.
Any other questions?